Welcome to the Be All You Can Be MSC, the podcast dedicated to empowering Army Medical Service Corps officers and professionals like you. I'm your host, Stephanie Moore. And on today's episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast, I am excited to introduce today's guest because she is not only a brilliant scientist, but a Medical Service Corps officer. So welcome today, Major Amanda Roth. So Amanda, if you could please just tell us a little bit about your Army experience.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on. Don't know if I'm brilliant, but I am indeed a scientist and very proud Medical Service Corps officer. I have been in the Army for 11 years now. I'm prior service Air Force. I got my graduate degree in Medical Microbiology and Immunology in between my Air Force and Army time. And one of my graduate school mentors was a previous student who was an Army microbiologist. He was a 71 Alpha and loved his job. Always actually onboarded several of us, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Malin, and he inspired me to put my packet in. I was selected, and my first duty station was actually at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. And there I was in charge of research projects. I did some bench work, actual pipetting and looking at bacterial plates like a traditional academic postdoc. But most of my job, even from very early on, was a lot of acquisition and business process type stuff. It takes all kinds of people to make a research lab work. It takes all kinds of people to get products that we are developing in the hands of soldiers. And I fell into the latter end of the acquisition world more so than the research basic science world from the very beginning. And so I did my time in the labs. I've been deployed to the Middle East. I served in Kenya at one of our forward research directorates. And now I am outside the medical research and acquisition community. I actually am the assistant product manager at Program Executive Office Enterprise Information Systems in a little program management office called Medical Communications for Combat Casualty Care. And it has medical in the name, but it is a software program at heart. And so I am trying my hand and really leaning into that opportunity to excel, to learn something completely out of my wheelhouse and try to become comfortable with software development and engineering and fielding.
And for most of the listeners out there, they probably commonly know that office as the MC4 office. Is that right?
Yes, the MC4 is, I wouldn't say it is a well-known name out there, right? If you've deployed and you have medical assets and they see patients at all, you have seen the MC4 systems, our big logo, and we've been fielding the electronic health record in the deployed setting for the Army for, I think, 22 years now. We are terminating and sunsetting that office sometime this year. And in its place, our modernization program, functional wise, and New Start program, finance wise, will be the Operational Medicine Information Systems Army office. So it's a really exciting time to be there. Most people in acquisition don't get to see the beginning of a program or the end. You kind of always work in the middle. The program has a long lifespan, most of them do. I'm actually at the office in a really unique time where I'm actually seeing formal termination and formal initiation. So it's been a really great experience.
No, it sounds incredible and a very interesting Army journey that you've had, especially if I compare it to my own. So, Amanda, one of the reasons I asked you to come on today, so one of the things I'm going to add to your introduction is you are one of the Deputy 8 X-ray ASI consultants to the Army Surgeon General. And that is a secondary skill identifier for all the listeners out there. The 8 X-ray is the Army Medical Department Acquisition Officer. I know that you are heavily involved in the program management side, and I know there's a diverse area for 8 X-rays since myself also carry the identifier. But can you tell us a little bit more about 8 X-rays and what types there are?
Absolutely. I am really proud to serve as one of several 8 X ray deputy consultants. And this ASI for medical acquisition is extremely diverse. So we are certified in 4 different acquisition functional areas or AFAs. As you mentioned, I do have a certification in program management. There's also AMED officers that are certified in contracting, test and evaluation, which I believe you have and is a very rare bird certification. And then more commonly, engineering and technical management or ETM. And so all of them are part of and have really distinct and sometimes overlapping roles with each other in the acquisition continuum of finding these material, little m material solutions for what soldiers need, testing them out, getting contracts for them to be made by industry or supported by industry. And then, of course, actually fielding and sustaining them on the program management side all the way through final disposition. And so I actually have 2 certifications, much like yourself. I am PM certified, and that's my primary certification field right now, since I am an assistant product manager in at PEO EIS. My secondary certification was actually the one that I first got and the one I started with at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in those research labs, and that is engineering and technical management. So there's a lot of opportunities in any and all of these. Honestly, if you are a provider or a scientist, a lot of times the entry point for people to be introduced to the ASI and to really learn about the acquisition process is in our research labs. Most of them, actually, I believe all of them, are under Medical Research and Development Command. Or so these are the labs like the one I've mentioned, RARE, the Institute for Surgical Research down in San Antonio, Texas, USAMRID, where they do all of the select agent work, think hot zone kind of activities, if you've ever read that book or seen that movie. The Army has always needed military scientists with operational experience and military providers that treat patients and see what operational medicine is like to inform on the early research and development of those solutions that we're possibly developing. And that's really what those labs are for. And so you go to those labs and you basically get your ETM certification. My personal experience was I really love what the labs do, and it's exciting work. I wanted to learn more and I wanted to learn a different stage of what the acquisition process was like. And so I actually had given a milestone A brief for what was then the Rapid Human Diagnostics device product line. And we successfully achieved our milestone A, the Milestone Decision Authority. The 1-star level SES had approved our plan, and that meant we could go get money to develop these diagnostics to detect infectious diseases and save lives. The brief was built by the team. I delivered it, and it was a really great group effort. And the commander at the time of USAMDA, the U.S. Army Medical Material Development Activity, he took me aside and was like, "That was a really good brief." I was like, "Thank you, sir. Team did awesome. Couldn't have done it without them. They're so smart." And he's like, "Super great. Teams are great. You need to try this program management internship." I was like, "I've never heard of that." And unbeknownst to me, and I think to a lot of ETM folks, so again, providers, scientists, etc., when that long-term health education and training MILPER comes out and the application is there and you open it and you look at the PDF on what programs you can apply for, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's several opportunities that are all AOC. And so I'm a 71 alpha. My AOC specific opportunities come up really early in that drop down box. And I literally had never scrolled to the bottom. I assumed everything that I could do, everything that I would want to do, because surely the Army knows, what's good for me. I assumed it was all up there. But no, if I scrolled all the way to the bottom, and Colonel Giese was right. There's several all AOC options, and one of them is the Program Management Acquisition Internship Program. We were really late in the game. I think applications were due in a week after he had told me, I really want you to apply. I got support from my leaders. I got signatures very quickly. And I was actually the first non 70 series officer to be accepted into that program. And I did the fellowship or the internship at USAMDA under now retired Colonel John Bailey. And it was a great experience. I got to go meet my 51 series counterparts, so non AMED acquisition functional area officers at the Army Acquisition Professionals course out in Huntsville. I continued to work on the diagnostic device product effort, different role this time, supporting more the program management side, cost, schedule, and performance. That is what got me the program management certification and kept me in now both communities, right? So the ETM, scientist, lab oriented side of things, but then also the program management side of the house. And I've met amazing friends along the way, folks that are in contracting at USACA. Now I work with my test and evaluation counterparts at medical test evaluation activity. And it's been really fun.
I appreciate you sharing that. Definitely nice to know there's several routes to go, that if you're at one of the laboratories that you have an opportunity to do the training through Defense Acquisition University to get those certifications, or the fact that you can take advantage of those long-term health education and training opportunities, which I know there's both for program management and contract management. And I really appreciate you going into that. So you mentioned it a little bit that you didn't even know your AOC as a microbiologist was able to take advantage of that opportunity. But how many AOCs are you tracking, Amanda, there are? Because I want to say, I know that there's opportunities both for, I mean, you mentioned the 70 series, so I know 70 kilos, 70 deltas, but I know the microbiologists can take advantage of it. I know some of the nurses as well, pharmacists, and if I'm missing any, please spout them off.
So I think for some of these opportunities and some of these slots, they actually may be like AMED and material. So like for my job at MC4, my slot is coded as an O5 alpha. So that is open to, technically speaking, any officer in that AIM move cycle that's in the AMED. But the majority of AOC specific or even MOS specific slots in the laboratories, again, that may get to an entryway certification and acquisition for ETM. Your 71 series alphas, bravos, echoes, and definitely foxtrots, and respectively, those are your microbiologists, your biochemists, your general laboratory officers, as well as your research psychologists. We also have a lot of 72 series, your environmental science officers, as well as your entomologists. They obviously deal a lot with many different aspects of infectious disease and epidemiology. And as you mentioned, providers. And so veterinarians, various physicians, but most certainly a lot of psychologists, as well as infectious disease physicians and preventive medicine physicians, and definitely nurses. So I think most of those slots are coded for certain AOCs within those cores, but there are definitely O5 alpha positions sprinkled or scattered throughout. And I think, I don't know, but I imagine that with AIM now being the Army's talent management system, it may be that we see more MOS, kind of broader categories for certain slots, or possibly even O5 alpha recodings, because it can be very difficult in any given move cycle to fill a slot with one specific type of officer. But time will tell on that. But most certainly throughout the AMED, there's an opportunity to get into 8 X-ray ASI assignments. What one thing I think that is really nice for ETM coded folks, when you have a slot at these labs, you actually are almost already coded for 8 X-ray, but you still have to earn it. In order to keep that ASI on your record, you have to do the coursework on DAU. You have to get the experience and learn about what it means to do programmatic research. We are not like academia, and we shouldn't be. The research we do has a purpose to it and should be feeding a capability gap that the soldier has in the operational environment. We are not doing research to just satisfy our own curiosity. It's so we can help soldiers. So, as we are doing that, you do these classes, you get this experience, and then you can get certified. Or if you decide this is not for you after your 3-year assignment, you go back to clinical and maybe this is experience. Hopefully that helped you, but really wasn't your thing. When I first started in the Army, there was a mindset from some of my senior leaders in my AOC and in some of the other science discipline AOCs. And they always conveyed that there was this border or this dividing line between research, quote unquote, and acquisition, quote unquote. And everybody has different skill sets and different preferences, but sometimes academics, and I'll say this because I am one, sometimes we can be a little bit snobby. You spend all that time in school, and maybe you're a doctor of something or a physician. And sometimes you love what you do so much that obviously what you do is the best and the most important and the only thing that really matters in a whole system or in a whole continuum. And so I had grown up in a culture where that was kind of the case. It's like, well, the research part is the most important. No one can do anything if we don't do our job first. And so we need a lot of the resources. And then when we're done and we give our bright ideas that we've tinkered with and validated a little bit, then we hand it off to the other people and they do the business stuff and whatever. And when I raised my hand, I was like, "Sir," I went to my consultant, I would like your support to do this acquisition program for LTHAT." He was extremely supportive and he made a joke kind of, but it was very similar to a lot of what I had been told with very serious faces up until that point. Again, he wasn't so serious about it, but that he said it, I think was representative of what we all experience. He was like, "Well, that's great that you want to do that. And I fully support you, then Captain Roth. I'm glad you want to because that means I don't have to and I can
Oh
stick to
my.
science." And I was like, "Well, okay, sir, thank you." And I still occasionally, more than I would like, encounter that attitude. And something I'm really trying to do in my role as 8 X-ray deputy with those 2 certifications and getting opportunities to speak with senior leaders in these different AOCs and my own consultant. Research, RDT&E, research development, test and evaluation are part of acquisition. All of it is on the giant placemat that we used to see in Captain's Career Course, which is now much more simplified by DAU and isn't so crazy looking. But all of it is part of acquisition. There are distinct phases for the different pathways in the adaptive acquisition framework. There is a part where RDT&E is more prominent and gets more of the resources. And then if you're doing it right, and if we are all together doing it right, eventually for that effort, RDT&E gets less money and the advanced development portion, working on the formal evaluation, the ramping up of the manufacturing lines, the larger acquisition, and then fielding and sustainment. That is what gets more of the resources. But we're all actually one team. There are different points at which we pass the baton and say, "Hey, it's ready to go to the next phase," and somebody else gets money. But there is no actual border or differentiation, at least according to the 5000 series, that says one is better. And there's nothing that really supports research not being part of acquisition.
It's interesting you bring that up. So my thoughts on it that I'm going to share is so When I look at, for example, your career, your first assignment after commissioning was Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. So you went straight into the research aspects. But I think, like many assignments, until you get to CGSC or intermediate level education, you don't really learn about force management and how the bigger strategic level operates. And when we're talking about defense acquisition system, it's a part of that force management. And I don't think a lot of people realize that it encompasses three different processes. It encompasses acquisition, it encompasses joint capability integration and development systems process, which is that whole like think tank where you're coming up with what your need is for the users. And then, of course, the planning, programming, and budget execution process, which is the funding aspect of it. And really, at the end of the day, we kind of miss the mark sometimes, I think, as leaders, where we don't, when our onboarding into these organizations, we don't say things like, hey, did you know the primary objective of the defense acquisition is to acquire quality supplies and services that satisfy a user's needs, that not only have measurable improvements to mission capability and operational support, but both at a fair and reasonable price? I think if you were to tell researchers that when they first came on board, they'd be like, what the heck does that have to do with my research? But I think it goes to what you're talking about, Amanda, is in order for them to have that appreciation, we have to educate them when they come on into the laboratories or when they come on into their first assignments about, hey, you're a part of a bigger piece of the pie, if you will. And so I love you sharing this experience you've had with the community in this discussion, because we as 8 X-rays are a part of a bigger system and we all have a little piece of that pie. And so I think it's important to know strategically how that system operates. So I will make sure to link a overview of the defense acquisition system in the description of this episode so folks can take a look, and also a link to the DAU education and certification requirements. So if they are at the laboratory and they don't have someone as passionate as you are with that regard, they have at least the tool to start looking at what does that entail exactly. I would be curious to know, because I can hear your passion, what excites you about having the ASI of an 8 X-ray?
The I mean, and you are completely correct. I am super excited about acquisition, big A acquisition, and then more, currently very much so little A acquisition in my program and such. What I really like about this, to be really honest, if I must confess, and I will say this to anybody that asks, I said it to my graduation committee. Maybe I shouldn't have, at least until they had graduated me. So I have a PhD in something sciencey, and I study bacteria and I know microbiology pretty good, maybe less than I should at the moment. But I do not find that I am a super innovative or creative scientist. One of my challenges when I was in graduate school and when I did work at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, I was not as much of a natural compared to some of my amazing and really great peers at coming up with ideas de novo and wondering why bacteria or viruses did this or how they mediated the progression of disease, et cetera, et cetera. What I was really good at was taking products or research or data that these amazing colleagues and friends of mine were generating and find ways to apply them to products to actually get into warfighters' hands. And so something I've said all along is, again, it takes all kinds of people to make a world. It takes all kinds of AMED officers and acquisition professionals to get products fielded to warfighters to actually increase our lethality or make a difference in combat power. And so the person that's really good at coming up with amazing ideas and innovating and breadboxing, prototyping, they oftentimes, and not always, I've met a few very exceptional individuals, but they oftentimes don't love the latter end of the acquisition process. They don't want to necessarily get into the weeds of what regulatory hurdles they have to meet or negotiate a contract or worry about meeting key performance parameters. Their wheelhouse is in that early development, that early testing, and coming up with the great ideas. some people like myself who really prefer the latter end, where you do still need that education, right? You need to be able to tell good data from bad data. You need to be able to hear what scientists are conveying, sometimes in a very specific, kind of nerdy way, and figure out what that means to the effort and to the product and what it could mean for the warfighter. But, I'm more on that side of things than the former. And so that is why when this opportunity came up and I looked into it and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is a thing. This is really where I can make a difference and maybe reduce a little bit of my own personal anxiety or imposter syndrome, if you will, sitting in a research lab and trying really hard. And I guess doing a good enough job, right? I'm still here. They haven't fired me yet. But it was a struggle for myself down in those labs. And this is much more in my lane and it comes much more naturally to me.
What knowledge specifically do you feel like it has armed you with to give you that comfort and that confidence and help you as a staff officer?
So, knowing the larger where the acquisition process fits within exactly what you mentioned earlier, the Army Force Management structure has been hugely helpful. So, in my deployment, I was a staff officer on the surgeon cell, and seeing the tactical RFIs and gaps and needs come from the units that were in our DRUs, that honestly fed a lot of and changed and shaped how I thought about what products we were developing, and being able to, once my deployment was done, take that back to the labs and consult and let them know, well, this is what I saw. These are what these units are asking for. Maybe we should consider revising some of how we ask our questions and study and research the different aspects of this product. And then definitely taking it back to my program management side of things, knowing what hurdles we have to get it to the field, having seen and actually been in said field, that made a really big difference. And so when you get a look at all of the different sides of these things, go to the operational environment, sit in these different TDA environments in the generating force, whose job should basically solely be to support that operational force, it makes that picture more clear. I think refines your focus, which can be really inspiring and can give you the motivation you need to get through sometimes what are drudgery type of days.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And it's good to point out for all the listeners out there. So, whether I know the operational deployments aren't quite as frequently as they had been during like the surge of OIF and OEF, however, any opportunity, whether it's a field exercise, various deployments that we have in mission sets, capturing some of those lessons learned. And we do have the AMED Lessons Learned department where you can submit those lessons learned ultimately actually does feed what those capability needs are from an operational tactical perspective. Because a part of that joint capabilities integration development process is they do capabilities based assessments, they know known as CBAs, and that's kind of where they look to determine, is there a material and non-material solution to address a possible capability gap that meets that capability need. And the only way you find out about what's needed is if organizations identify that are out there doing those mission sets. And like you said, either have the knowledge base from the greater force management perspective to be able to package it and articulate that as you're able to do, or they're able to provide that input as a unit and an organization through the AMED Lessons Learned department, which is kind of an input into where some of that starts. And oftentimes their database of lessons learned is reviewed to determine what's needed both currently and for the future. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so, is there any specific characteristics or skills that you think make someone successful in our ASI of 8 X-ray?
Absolutely. I think and some of them are common to officers in the Army or any of the services. You definitely have to be driven. Detail oriented, I think, is something that is a very common characteristic, both as scientists and providers in the research side of the acquisition continuum. I would hope they would be detail oriented because they are the ones gathering the data sets, analyzing those data sets. And on the PM side as well, cost, schedule, and performance covers a lot. I mean, think about it like a three ring circus, if you will, and it has to be integrated and synchronized in multiple dimensions. Time is probably maybe the most important part of that. So, seeing the details for what they are, knowing what to look for, that's really important. Honestly, being a people person, I can't emphasize how much those quote unquote soft skills, or if you're a lean person, non-value add skills are in program management and in the defense acquisition system in general, in order to synchronize that three ring circus of cost, schedule, and performance, or requirements, PPBE, and little a acquisition, the intangibles of coordinating with the other stakeholders in those three elements, the engagement, the constant engagement you are doing with your stakeholders, who include end users, senior leaders, lateral little a acquisition offices. If you can't do that, it is going to be a very difficult assignment for you. So having communication skills, people skills is incredibly important. And I know I said driven earlier, but I guess I'm going to circle back to that. Caring about this. One of the reasons why I think a lot of scientists and ETM certified folks maybe don't want to explore program management is because their passion, again, lies with what they do as researchers. Mine, as I talked about, it really didn't, or it came more difficult to me to generate internal passion about research. I am very passionate about the latter end of things and acquisition in general. Again, making sure soldiers have what they need so we can win wars and be successful. If that is something that doesn't really drive you, then the 8X-ray ASI is it's going to be more difficult for you to get motivated to maintain. And I think some of the most successful 8X-ray ASI officers that I've worked with, they all speak with extreme passion about what their role at that point in time is within the defense acquisition process. And they're the ones that inspire me. And I've worked with amazing, and Stephanie, I know you've worked with some of the same amazing people that have really led charges and mentored and shepherded junior and now becoming senior officers in their own right to carry on that motivation and that attitude and that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad you clarified the people person part. Otherwise, we were going to have every introvert, including myself, running for the hills. But no, you're absolutely spot on. And I will re echo your soft skills. I think that is an attribute we don't put enough attention on. And I would say
Mhm.
across the force. A lot of times people early on in your career will say things like, you need to network, you need to network. And I know for some that sounds icky, it sounds like we're a politician and that we're kissing babies and shaking a bunch of hands. But, whether you call it networking, I like how you put it, use that soft skill of coordinating with other stakeholders, but that's really what it is. And our community is so small that we have to be able to leverage each other and our strengths and weaknesses, especially in a resource limited environment, to make sure that we're continuing to push the mission set forward. And that's where that networking comes into play. And funny enough, Amanda, because I know you're talking about the research side maybe didn't resonate with you at the same degree of passion that it does for others, but our community is so small that even before I had met you, both on the research and the non-research side, I hear things like, "Oh, have you met Roth?" And I'm like, Roth, it's like this one word term. It is not Major Roth. It's not Amanda Roth. It's Roth. Oh, have you met Roth? And I think that really truly speaks to both you as a professional, but that aspect of the coordinating with other stakeholders. And then also that drive of caring about the ultimate goal and mission set of meeting those needs on the battlefield. And so please don't discount what you're doing out there, because I heard about you long before I met you, and that speaks volumes. And I want to share that with the audience because, again, I think it's really important that when we do talk about those soft skills and networking, that we don't have that icky thought about it, and it really is about coming together as a team across organizations and across duty assignments. So thank you very much for how you were able to articulate that. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and I'm going to ask you about something that was not something I thought I was going to ask you about. But before we turned on record, I had asked you about some of your research you had done. And I know you said you don't have passion, but I came across research you did back in 2014 on the airworthiness testing of medical maggots. So for me, a non-researcher, that sounds incredible and it was very interesting to read about it. I would like you to just share like a top highlight of that research.
Yes, awesome. So, this is actually one of my favorite publications that I have ever been on the author bylines for. And we actually evaluated the surrogate functionality of medical maggots as a means of wound healing or wound treatment. So, in coin, you would get injured in the Middle East, you would be medevaced to your role 4 in Germany, and then you would have to make it back to either Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas or Walter Reed National Military Medical Center out in Bethesda. And that trip is 8 to 10-ish hours depending on where you have to go. And anecdotally, people who had major wound infections or amputations would have they would get worse. They would be stabilized at Landstuhl in Germany, but they would get worse during flight. And so we were looking at means by which we could minimize negative outcomes during that transit period. If you did not know, medical maggots are an FDA cleared medical device for wound healing. However, it's for diabetic chronic ulcer type wounds. It hasn't been approved for other wound indications. And so this experiment was to see if medical maggots could make it on a plane. And long story short, they do pretty good. They don't particularly love the cold. The flight crews and your fellow passengers also get very weirded out when you are a little captain scientist with a box full of rotting pork that has medical maggots doing their thing and eating it and getting bigger and secreting and excreting antimicrobial compounds. I was not the popular kid on that plane. I sat literally in a corner by myself. But it was a good paper. And I think there is a pathway to make this a part of a tool in a provider's toolkit. There's some logistical challenges and definitely that ick factor psychological perception of having maggots in a wound. But again, it's all about warfighters and what they need. And if in our next conflicts, this situation or capability gap makes itself more prominent again, it may very well be something that we decide to invest in to optimize and then field to air crews before medevac flights.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, it was fascinating to read. And so I will make sure I link that as well so that the audience is interested in reading more about that. To me, that's creative thinking, but I am also not a researcher. So I don't think you gave yourself enough credit earlier. But thank you for sharing a little bit more about that. So, Amanda, I think we talked a lot about the 8 X ray and acquisition opportunities. And I appreciate you coming on and just showing the expanse of what the ASI 8 X-ray, the possibilities are, and that education and what it offers. It's definitely a unique opportunity. So let's switch gears to some fun. So, what is the best career advice you've either ever received or given?
The best career advice that I've ever received or have given, I think it's actually the same, was apply for it. And so I've already shared Colonel Giesi's advice to me for the program management acquisition internship program. Apply for it. I know there's a lot of problems, challenges, short notice, but apply for it. Colonel Malin, when he onboarded me or encouraged me to apply for the Army and drop a packet, that's what he told me. Apply for it. I'm an 8 X-ray deputy consultant. I also am heavily involved in my own AOC, my 71 Alpha microbiologist community. Give them a shout out. Our consultant, Colonel Sobolski, and deputy consultant, Lieutenant Colonel Demons. I tell a lot of our juniors this as well. Oh, I want to try this program. I don't know if I'm ready. Apply for it. I think there's other people applying and I'm not going to, make the OML. Doesn't matter. Apply for it. Practicing getting your packet together, taking a look at your own records through the lens of a selection board or a senior leader who's making a personal choice to have someone on their team. That helps you understand where your strengths are. It may show you where you could fill in some blanks on your CV, resume, soldier talent profile. And it's good practice for when there does come a time where you do feel completely ready and it's the right time for you personally and your family to put in a packet. You don't want that first time to be when the stakes are incredibly high and where maybe this is what you might feel is your only option. Try it a few times and see what's out there.
Well, that is wonderful advice, and I agree. I've been surprised the things I've applied for and had then the opportunity open up, even when I didn't think I was qualified or ready. So, excellent advice. And I'm glad you took it so that you're a part of the 8X-ray community. So, our last and final fun question: what is a fun fact about you? And if you don't have one, what is your favorite ice cream?
I hope everybody has a fun fact about themselves. My fun fact is that I am a cat lady. I won't say crazy. Don't want to stigmatize cat ladies like that, but I have a cat. I would like more. If I could fit them in my house, I would get more. But my cat is named Kidogo. I got him when I was stationed in Kenya at the US Army Medical Research Directorate Africa. And Kidogo is Kiswahili for little bit or little thing. And he was a kitten when we got him. And now he is a verifiable monster and who rules my house. You actually might have heard him during this podcast. So sorry about that.
No, you're in good company. Then if you're a cat lady, then I'm a cat lady too. And mine, her name is Shenanigans. And let's just say that if the name doesn't give it away, I don't know what to tell you. So,
Yes.
well, thank you very much for coming on, Amanda. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been very insightful and entertaining. So, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And to anybody who's out there who is more curious about anything I've spoken about, either on the research or the PM side or anything else, please feel free to reach out to me. I am on LinkedIn, definitely on Global. I think I'm the only Amanda Roth that's in the military. Happy to hear from you.
Thank you for joining us. Don't miss the next episode of the Be All You Can Be MSc podcast. Subscribe now and join our vibrant community of ambitious professionals who are taking their careers to the next level. The opinions shared on this podcast are the personal opinions of the guests and the hosts. They do not reflect the official position of the Medical Service Corps, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.